French language instruction is hard. We've mostly all done some of it. I know I have. And my biggest takeaway after 4 years spent in French is that by the end of it, I didn't know anything. I know I'm not alone. How can we sort that out? Who's to blame? What's a good end goal? All that and more, this time on Edumacation. Welcome back to Edumacation. Today we have with us Tyler Graham, who's been heading up the development of an exciting new French instruction plan called Practice Makes Better. So, Tyler, thanks for coming back onto the program. Can you tell us about Practice Makes Better?
I sure can. Thanks for having me back, Eric. I guess the first thing that I want to stress is that this isn't exclusively a French instruction plan. The skills that we aim to master throughout the program are skills needed for basic fluency in any language. So a Spanish teacher or an English language learning teacher could adapt this system to their own purposes with very little intervention.
Okay, you prepared this with French in mind, but you're saying it can be used with any other language.
Absolutely. So I'm a French teacher, and French language instruction is a passion of mine, and it's in my area of expertise. It's where my base of knowledge is, and so I focused in on that. But like, for example, the very first thing we work on learning in Practice Makes Better is a simple "Hi, how are you?" greeting. And the necessity of that in French is the same as it would be in Spanish or Mandarin or American Sign Language. And the last level, the end goal, is to be able to order coffee or a sandwich in a city where the target language is spoken. And that's a great end goal for anyone in any language. If I were to try my hand at learning Mandarin, for example, I'd ultimately want to get to a place where I could go to China and get my coffee. Language is just a tool for communication, right? The goals to reach are more or less the same no matter the language. I want you to learn bonjour. My colleague Maria wants you to learn hola. And my colleague Shan wants you to learn ni hao. So substitute any language, the steps more or less remain the same. I actually made a point of including very little French on the site for the express purpose of facilitating the use of the program by teachers of any language. So yeah, that's why I would say it's pretty easily transferable.
Okay. You mentioned as an end goal ordering coffee, but why stop there? How far do you take this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Basically it's a question of necessity. Students taking French as a second language in school in BC are the extreme majority never going to be doing a university degree in French. They're not going to need to learn how to write a dissertation or research articles in French. And what's more, those capabilities are never going to happen with an 80-minute French instruction course every day or so during the school year. It's just impossible. So what have I done is I've identified an end goal that is achievable and that does have practical and real-world application. I know that when I first went to Quebec in 2009, despite having done a ton of French language instruction here in BC, I couldn't order a coffee in a cafe in a way that didn't make me sound like a complete foreigner. So I want my students, and for any student, to be able to have simple and genuine interactions in French or in any language, and I think that Practice Makes Better sets the course.
Okay. Can you explain a bit about what the course is? What's the contents?
Absolutely. So what I've done is, as we discussed, I've identified an end goal, that being the cafe order, backwards design, as we like to say in education. And then I identified what steps one would need to take to reach that spot.
And how did you come up with these steps?
Yeah, so in French, there's a testing system, a rating system called the Diplôme d'études de la langue française. It's the DELF for short. And that's where I started from. The DELF ranks language learners from level A1, an absolute beginner, all the way up to level C2, native-like fluency. So like you and I, for example, would be level C2 in English. With that framework in mind, I got to work. As discussed earlier, the top tiers aren't reasonable or realistic, so I eliminated them from consideration. In Practice Makes Better, a student will climb from A1 through to A2 up to B1. And B1 is a level where the idea is that you can become independent. From there, do with your French what you like. I know for myself, when I first moved to Montreal full-time in 2012, I was around a level B1. I was able to order while I went out. I was able to date. I was able to meet a person and more or less be myself. And that's what I'm hoping to give my students. And then for how to get there along the way, certainly, I'm a professional and a fluent French speaker, so I do have some degree of expertise on the matter. But what I've also done is look at the Ministry of Education's curriculum for the grades we're dealing with, 8 through 11, and the key concepts that are expected to be covered in those grades help to make up the framework for advancing from one belt to the next.
Belts, okay. What are those levels exactly? Your program is called Practice Makes Better, but it has this karate theme.
Yeah. So I think the belts are kind of a fun way to do it. Everyone's pretty familiar with the concept of a white belt, a black belt, etc., and what the different levels denote. So we went with that.
Okay, but what if you're not a big ninja fan or a karate fan, or are you locked into that guideline?
Not at all. And I like you use the word guideline, and that's a key piece. So I've taken levels A1, A2, and B1, and then split them up into 8 different belt levels, and then indicated what grade levels would be generally covered in each grade. But if you're someone who would rather work through, let's say, a military theme from private to general, maybe a Harry Potter theme from year 1 at Hogwarts all the way up to Dumbledore, anything would work. Everything listed as white belt would just now be called private or year 1 at Hogwarts, etc., so on and so forth. It's arbitrary, really. The content is what's important. White belt is just a name. And as Shakespeare said, a name is just a name.
And that makes sense. Okay, so how do you go from one belt to the next?
Super simple. There are 9 competencies that a student must demonstrate mastery of to earn their next belt. And every set of competencies builds on its predecessor. So at any given time, a student is working on a few very specific skills.
Okay, so the grade levels and the belts don't perfectly correlate. How does that work?
Yeah, so the average student should be able to get through levels white, yellow, and orange during grade 8. And that's just going off the provincial curriculum for that grade. But some kids are above average, and as we know, some are below. So if a student doesn't meet the criteria for orange belt by the end of grade 8, it's not that big a deal. In grade 9, their new teacher can pick up where they left off. And the same is true if someone's getting a little ahead of the curve. Their following teacher can prepare some more advanced activities for them based on where they're at.
That makes sense. Would a teacher have to follow this program? Isn't teacher autonomy important in this profession?
Yes, it certainly is. And so let's not use the words have to. This is a guideline. Like we were saying before, it's a rating system that is languages specific. Me, personally, I use the AIM method of language acquisition, at least at the outset. So I'm going to work within that framework to hit the targets outlined in Practice Makes Better. But anyone can use any of their own stuff. As long as the targets are met, the kids are going to proceed. Any teacher can keep using all the same stuff that they've been using for years. There's nothing new to adopt, and then more importantly, there's nothing to abandon. But ideally, yes, every teacher in the languages department at any given school would be on board, and that would make for a seamless transition for students from one year's teacher to the next.
Okay. Well, I think Practice Makes Better sounds very fun and would have been quite motivational for me when I was a student. Who doesn't want to get a black belt?
Yeah.
Thanks again, Tyler, for being on the show, and I'm very hopeful and curious to see if your program takes off.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thanks again to Tyler for coming on to the program. It's good to know that the next generation is going to have a better and more meaningful experience learning French than did myself and my friends. And for everyone out there, we'll be back next week with another episode of Edumacation.